I will speak about one project in Senec, but as an introduction, I'd like to speak a little bit about other activities in the country and also about the Jewish community in Slovakia. So, first of all, I'm managing today two institutions. One is called the Jewish Cultural Institute, and the other one is the Jewish Community Museum. The museum is part of the Jewish community of Bratislava, and the Jewish Cultural Institute was established by the Federation of Jewish Communities. So first of all, I want to say that my first publication was related to my background in art history and Jewish studies. I wrote my dissertation at the Hochschule für Jüdische Studien at the University of Heidelberg. And a few years later, we have published it in Slovakia. It is on synagogues in the country, and it was just really 2007. So since then, many of these synagogues have been restored, and we are talking about roughly 100 former synagogues. I will show you some pictures. Then we developed a project called the Slovak Jewish Heritage Route, linking some important Jewish heritage sites. And so this was one of the projects. There is a guidebook we published to Jewish sites in Western Slovakia. A nice booklet about Jewish heritage route, but I'd like to speak a little bit about the Jewish community. So the Jewish community today in Slovakia has roughly 2,000 to 3,000 people. Based on census, we have 2,000 members of Jewish communities, or people who declare themselves to belong to Jewish religion. There are a few more thousand people of Jewish background. Not necessarily everybody wants to be associated with the Jewish community. But anyway, this is a picture of Seder, the Jewish Community Center in Bratislava, which is the largest Jewish community in the country. We have roughly 400 people there. And obviously, this is how very often people see any Jewish life in our corner. Because obviously, there are always some stereotypes. So you want to see things very often black and white, because this is like the last people, and it gives this kind of a different feeling. I will show you this one, which is more kind of a colored image. This is teaching kids in the Jewish kindergarten. I want to just mention, this is Rabbi Dr. Goldstein from London. It used to come quite often to Bratislava. But aside to this, we also have a Chabad rabbi in Bratislava, Rabbi Myers, who is in charge of the Bratislava Jewish community. And I just a little bit as a good curator, you need to also promote your family through pictures. This is Bat Mitzvah of my daughter. So Bat Mitzvah at the former synagogue in Shamorin, not far away from Bratislava, where you see Rabbi Goldstein together with a young rabbi who came in 2014 as a result of the Russian occupation of Crimea. Rabbi Misha Kapustin, who came from Ukraine, and we just took him with his family to Bratislava, and he learned Slovak since then, and has been very successful. And obviously, as a Reform rabbi, he comes to places where Orthodox rabbis would not travel because it would be 2 days schlep to be there for Shabbat, and sometimes he just comes there, talks to people, makes nice kiddush. They're not very religious, but he leaves the same evening by train to Bratislava. So, or he comes for Seder where the people meet. So he travels around the country. There are smaller communities. You mentioned Nove Zámky. There is a community in Komarno, in Žilina, and some in Trenčín. Some of these communities have 20, 30, 60 people. And it's important to send someone over who will just be with them and bring some sort of Yiddishkeit to them. But I'm mentioning this Bat Mitzvah. It was actually the first Bat Mitzvah in the country, because obviously in the classical Bratislava shul, we don't let women to the Torah, because obviously it's an Orthodox synagogue. But the synagogue of Shamorin is a clear example of a synagogue which is roughly 26 kilometers from Bratislava. It's used as an art gallery. It belongs to the Federation, and we are art museum, modern art center to be precise, and it's been leased for 30 years to a local civic association that runs this site, and has been gradually restored. But inside looks like this, and we also think it should stay like this because we don't want this to look like a brand new building. It has its story. It was nearly torn down in the early 1990s. It was nearly blown up in 1945 by retreating German army, so it survived, and it's used as an occasional venue for private bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, and also obviously some chupot, where just people want to not to make it in the community center, but rather outside of the city and to invite whom they want. Just some images of synagogues. Really, when we talk about synagogue architecture in Slovakia, we can say we have been blessed as a country with some phenomenal architecture. Just to mention, Synagogue of Lučenec, designed by Leopold Baumhorn, Synagogue of Malacky, designed by Wilhelm Šťastný of Vienna, Synagogue of Žilina, that's the one at the bottom. This is considered like one of the last European synagogues built just before World War II in the 1930s, designed by Peter Behrens, the famous German architect considered the father of modern architecture. So really we have fantastic buildings, and you can see they've been gradually restored in the past years. Synagogue in Žilina runs as a cultural venue. It belongs to the Jewish community of Žilina, but it's used by a cultural association that has fundraised money and restored the building. And finally, one of the most beautiful synagogues in the country is the synagogue in Prešov. Prešov in the east of the country. We also should mention that we have hundreds of cemeteries. Maybe 50 of them are taken care by volunteers, local municipalities, and aside to these 50, there are maybe another 650 to 750 other cemeteries. Some of them lost in forest, some of them overgrown, some of them don't have matzevod at all, but they are there in the country. So obviously we cannot imagine that all these cemeteries would look like a golf course with cut grass and maintained, because there's no local Chevra Kadisha. And even to maintain a cemetery in Bratislava, which still has an active Jewish community, has been really very costly for the community. So speaking about Judaica, I want to just mention one wonderful collection. That's the collection of the Jewish community of Bratislava. This is a picture from 2008, before we began curating this collection. The other picture is storage, which we have built, and we have gradually restored objects. And in 2012, we have opened the Jewish Community Museum in Bratislava, which is in the women's section, or former women's section of the synagogue in Bratislava. And you can see it has been painstakingly integrated into the layout, the original design of the synagogue, which actually this year we will celebrate 100 years of this building. And this is a museum that I have established in 2012, and every year we run also a special exhibition. And this special exhibition is always also connected with some nice catalog, which is a result of research of team of experts, not only from Slovakia, but also from other countries. Just to mention one project that we've been conducting outside of Bratislava. It's a project related to the first Jewish museum in Slovakia, established in 1928 by Eugen Barkáň and his association. That museum's collection is phenomenal, and we've been researching it, restoring it, publishing it, and we had 4 exhibitions with precious objects that were collected before World War II all around Slovakia. And just to show you some working image, these are my colleagues, curators, Dr. Jana Švantnerová, who is a leading Judaica expert in the country, and the standing lady is Dr. Zsuzsanna Toron, the director of the Hungarian Jewish Museum and Archives. We've been working very closely, and we've been researching this collection. So we should be putting online objects from this collection later this year. And just to give you an example, 8 years ago, we ran the first time a conference, Jewish Heritage in Slovakia. Ever since, we've been running it once a year. And thanks to COVID, we learned how to make it online. So today it has over 1,000 views, such a conference. And obviously not everybody would look at it the same time when it is actually taking place. But we see another week, 2 later, there are really hundreds of people that watch it. So this is an idea to really promote Jewish heritage in Slovakia. And I have to say that in the country, we did in the past 30 years really long path in recognizing Jewish heritage as an integral part of country's heritage. It's not a question whether these objects should be protected, restored, and they should be really acknowledged. It's a question, obviously, of lack of management and funding. Just to give you an example, this is a current project that we are working on. This is restoration of a synagogue in Trenčín. It's a beautiful Art Nouveau synagogue, which in 2026 will be one of the venues of the European Capital of Culture. The city will be hosting this prominent European cultural event, and synagogue will be integrated. So we have 3 more years to finish restoration, and this is a picture before actually restoration work began. And just to give you an idea, it's not always only about restoring a building. It's actually generating the audience, the future users that will identify with that building. Just to show you a simple event which we ran last year, first time. It was a Jewish-Christian event, cooperation between the Federation and Jewish Federation and diocese, Catholic diocese of Žilina. So together there was a cycling, there were Catholic priests, there were members of the Jewish community, there was a governor of the Trenčín region there. So it was a very nice event from synagogue to the church in Puchov. So this is in order to generate the audience, and we will continue with this event also this year. Speaking about other projects that we've done in the past, I want to mention to you another one that was actually done for the synagogue of Senec. My focus of my talk today. Senec is a community that functioned. Senec community functioned until 1964, I think, when it closed down completely. And the synagogue was taken over by the state already in 1958, if I'm correct, or 56 or 58. And the synagogue was restituted back by the Federation of Jewish Communities after 1989 in the early 1990s. But there is no Jewish community there. So we as a federation, we made a deal with the Bratislava self-governing region that they will restore, we will sell them the synagogue for only €1, and they will restore the synagogue for cultural purposes as a venue. And the deal was that upstairs, in the former women's gallery, there will be an exhibition, permanent exhibition, dedicated to the history of the Jewish community of Senec and Jewish heritage of the Bratislava region. So that was a project I worked on with a team of people, not me, myself. Aside to me, there was a fantastic, successful architect that designed before the exhibition in our synagogue in Bratislava. And we've been working with him also for the Trenčín project. Historian Dr. Michala Lončíková, Gabor Strešňák, a local historian, and my Judaica curator colleague Jana Švantnerova. So we've been working together. It's not a result of my own work, but that's opportunity for me to present results of this. So Senec itself today has 20,000 people. It's a more or less suburb of Bratislava. It's still a district town, so there are license plates which have SC, so for Senec, which they're going to abolish now because there wouldn't be any, and you will not be able to recognize where the driver is from anymore. But at this moment, it's still visible on cars. And in 2018, Bratislava self-governing region began restoring the synagogues. So you see Rabbi Kapustin together with General Vicary today of the Diocese of Žilina. So he was one of the cyclists at the event before. But before that, he was Martin Kramara was the spokesperson of the Bishopric Conference of Slovakia. So in 2018, the restoration work of synagogue began. So it's not only the synagogue. Behind the building, there was archaeological research. They found mikvah there. They found leftovers of a house where the Chazan Michael Klein lived with his family, and we were happy to interview Mrs. Klein 2 years ago in Israel. Another very important building was the rabbinate, where the family of Rabbi Brezenitz lived. This is what it looks like today. So you can see that there is no decoration on walls, and you may see that the local museum actually saved decorative elements from the facade. So they are in their collection. So at least something from the house was preserved. Then you see what a school looks like today, the former Jewish school. Senec had many buildings torn down, but Jewish school stayed. And it's now a Christian center. And finally, there's a Jewish cemetery of Senec, quite a fair condition. It was walled around just about 3-4 years ago. And we have completely documented what is there, so you can go to the website, which we have dedicated to the Senec project, so you can see actually all the matzevot that actually are standing, and I was able to photograph names. I didn't bother to, there were some matzevot lying, so they're too heavy to manipulate, so I didn't do this, but those that were visible, they are all online. So that was our beginning of the story of Senec. We didn't know much. We just wanted to make an exhibition, permanent exhibition dedicated to the community. And the first step was photographing the entire cemetery to know what names were there, what families were there, working with census, and then try to reach out to families to hear their stories. And it was a kind of a detective work, browsing people's Facebooks, trying to find, and then calling people, and at the end we managed to find families of Senec and to collect the story of the community. Just to see, Senec was not the major Jewish center. Senec was a small market town where you see that the Jewish community was generally roughly 10% of the population. So in 1930 there were 502 Jews and 5,609 people lived in the town. We can say they didn't have a yeshiva, as some other communities in the region had. We can say there was not rich associational life, and in some Jewish communities there was. And when we interviewed people, we just found out that they were all business people, working services, working in services connected to agriculture. And obviously all children, when they came back from school, they worked in the family business. Wives worked in family business. And when they were not working, they just were happy to be together. So there were no, and obviously nobody opened his business or shop on Shabbat. But that was not, I would say, there were some communities that were very, very firm Orthodox, but still this one was not that type of a community. With our archive research, cemetery documentation, work with data, with birth, marriage, and death registers, census of 1930 and 1941, with family archives, oral history, we were able to, so to say, reconstruct the idea about the Jewish community of Senec. Just to give you an idea, here this is something related to the Kohn family. The Kohns owned on the main square, and you see the story. The first member of the Kohn family, Heinrich, buried at the Jewish cemetery. Jakob Kohn died before World War II. I think he had diabetes. You see him there. And you see 6 of his children. He had actually 7. Only one, they all survived. But one of them, Juri Kohn, remained in Senec, while the others left out and they were in Canada and elsewhere. So you see their picture. And then you see a picture of the family visiting the place in the early 2000s, and Mrs. Kohn explaining about family heritage. So this is a mixture of images based on family histories, memory of the family, and also researching genealogy through available records, and also learning through collecting data at the cemetery. Another example is the family Lampel. Lampel family were horse dealers. They were experts in horse dealing. From interviews with Mrs. Lampel that we interviewed 2 or 3 years ago in Israel, she married into the family, but she remembered that the business with horses was that they were really selecting horses for races, for noble families and so on. These were really top expert business, what the Lampels did. And one part of the family had a cafe in the town. So, and you see now a matzeva of Ludwig Lampel. You see his children passed away tragically during the Shoah. And you see they are listed with their wives on the back of the matzeva, as was common in those days after the war, just memorializing of dear ones that didn't have their grave. And then their son of Gyula Lampel was actually Tibor Moshe Lampel, who managed to leave the country in the 60s. And we were in touch with his son Yuval Lampel that lives in Israel. So in that way we were able to collect some family pictures and some other items, obviously scanned. So we are trying to put together family stories. We try to learn what was the religious life. What was the Jewish life in the 19th century, during interwar time? What happened during World War II? What was the Jewish life after the war, and what kind of memory of the Jewish community still exists? And while we continue with this research, and we continue now with research of residential patterns, real estate ownership, businesses, and so to say research of what is called so-called Alltag, the daily life, what people did. And because one ambition at the beginning was to make a permanent exhibition dedicated to the story of Senec's community, but actually now our main goal is to publish a major volume about this community, because it's a rare case of combining all kind of available sources. And obviously we've been blessed with time, also little money to do research. And we start now again this spring, because the ambition is by 2025 to have a volume about the history of the community. And it's a rare case about one community. We are not able to do it for everyone, but since this synagogue will function as a venue, there will be an exhibition there's an idea, there is a really growth of interest into Jewish story of Senec. I'll speak about this later. So my colleague Gabor researched 19th century, 18th century, the beginning of Jewish settlement in the area, going to old records when these first Jewish families appear, and obviously there were still feudal subjects. Later on, researching businesses of families that were based there in the 19th century. And obviously, Jews were prominent in the business, so you see here interwar advertisements for businesses, for just the dentistry of Rudolf Klein, who was actually a dental technician, but he did a dentistry job. So this tells you a little bit about Jewish life, and we shouldn't only think about in terms of religious life, but we should see that these people had businesses, worked there, lived there, had children who attended school, and we are trying to put all these stories somehow together. Just to show you also, Senec had one noble family, originally from Senec. Benő Kamer made it to Budapest. He became a businessman in textile, and in the early 1900s, just before World War I, he was ennobled Benő Kamer descents. So his predicate actually connected to the town of his origins. Actually, we had Kamers visiting last year in Bratislava. As part of the research, we also tried to find out when exactly the synagogue was dedicated. There is this wash basin with year, Jewish year 5667. We tried to really clearly see why this year is given there, and we found out in a Hungarian newspaper that actually synagogue was dedicated on the first of just a few days before New Year's, Jewish New Year. Thursday was 20th of September, but actually they dedicated it on Sunday, not during the Rosh Hashanah, which is a holiday. But since it was dedicated a few days before, they put the date of a new year already. So that's why it is 5667. Actually, technically, it was still 5666 year, just 3 days before it was over. So that helped us to really see when the synagogue was dedicated. And obviously, this is what it looked like. It was a prominent building on one of the main squares of Senec. And I have to say, today, It's one of maybe 3 most prominent buildings. There's a synagogue, there's a little house which is called Turkish House, if you're familiar with Senec, and there's a church. Town itself, maybe you're recording it, I shouldn't say it, it's not probably the nicest one. It is kind of a provincial town that in the course of 20th century, they demolished a lot of houses, built all these blocks in the 80s, and in the early 1990s, they were also demolishing buildings on main streets, and it's kind of a mishmash of everything. And I have to say, in the past 100 years, Senec was growing from a small Hungarian-speaking provincial town. Today, the Slovak nationality or ethnicity is a majority. So there's only Hungarian-speaking minority in the town. The synagogue will be restored, hopefully, as a cultural venue. We are nearly there. It's nearly restored, but anyway, I would like to speak about some people. So first of all, I want to mention Emanuel or Menachem Mendel Breznitz, who was a rabbi of the Jewish community. We were in touch with his family. We interviewed his daughter Sabina. He had 4 daughters. All daughters survived the war. He and his wife, unfortunately not. They were deported in 1944 to Auschwitz. Rabbi Breznitz was a very modern man. He was intellectual. He corresponded with Max Brod. He read German and Hungarian newspaper from Prague and Budapest. He was dedicated Zionist, and he was convinced that his daughter should learn agriculture. And this is what they did actually in their spare time in the court of the house. They had their plans. The idea was that one day when they settled in Israel, they should be ready. Moreover, he was kind of a liberal Orthodox rabbi, though he studied at the yeshiva in Bratislava, and his wife was a direct descendant of the Chatam Sofer. His wife, or maybe Mama. Now, just let me think about this. He allowed his daughter to ride a bicycle. Moreover, it is known in Senec there was a lake which was called Bager, and Jewish girls went there, and he allowed them to swim, and but under condition there would be no boys. So they made themselves what they called a kosher strand, so just for Jewish girls only. So we see that lakes are a very important part of the story of Senec Jews. So we should see it as one of spaces where people would go. And I have to say, I spoke with some people who were big swimmers in Israel and came from Slovakia after the war, and they said very little people could swim actually in the country. But it seems that everybody in Senec was addicted to swimming in these lakes. And another very important person related to the community was Michael Klein, who was a chazan of the community. He left in 1939. And we have learned that actually when he prayed in the shul, that when non-Jewish people would stop in the street in front of the synagogues, that they could hear his beautiful voice. We have interviewed his daughter. After the war, we know that he returned to Slovakia, to Košice, and then he went through Israel, but he ended up in America, where he died in the 1950s. So we are in touch with the Kleins. And another family, and just want to show you some other interesting pictures, how we work. Bottom, this is Sheva Brachot. It's one of these events connected to Jewish wedding. So Sheva Brachot taking place in Senec, in the family Bonhadi, where the girl Adina Bonhadi just got married in Trnava, and with her parents, Sheva Brachot take place in Senec. And there is another picture which shows a very important event. That's a Purim Spiel. So first of all, this is a picture from the archive of family Löwber from here. So you see actually Edita Löwber as Ahasuerus, and you see a rabbi's daughter Sabina as Queen Esther. And from the collection of the Lampel family, we have invitation for this event. You can see that Mr. Ehrenfeld was the head of a local school board, We also know that Mr. Ehrenfeld was, after the war, the president of the Jewish community, but he left in 1948 and there was someone else who took over. And making this sort of a research, we came to this fantastic picture that shows us the school children with the beloved teacher, Livia Neumannova from Bratislava. This school, this is a unique picture we got from Canada, from the Kohn family, but we were able to share it with several people who were able to see themselves there. And it was especially Rabbi's daughter who helped us to identify some of the children. And it was Mr. Weisberger who could see himself there. He just sits here. And you may see there are other school children here, like Rabbi's daughter Sabina, and more children. So altogether from these 35 kids, at the end, we know 27 names. And my colleague went to all the databases and tried to see what happened with these children, if they survive or not. And so the story of these school children was very important for us. There's another picture which is very interesting, because it was a school with 2 classes and 2 teachers, Julius Hübsch and Livia Neumannova. Mr. Hübsch later married Mrs. Neumannova, and then he had to stop working because that was during interwar Czechoslovak Republic time, that women, if they got married, they could no longer work in the state services, and school was one of them. So that's why she was in Bratislava. Mr. Hübsch was a social democrat, was a good friend of Rabbi, and we have learned that through interview with Mrs. Wertheim that lives here in Sydney. She remembered that he left in 1938 because he was social democrat somewhere to South America. So then we began browsing all the South American Facebook accounts, and at the end we managed to find his grandson, and actually his son Ferry was born. So first of all you see Mr. Hübsch and Mrs. Hübsch riding horse in Bolivia, because in 1939 he managed to escape to London, and from London he received an agricultural visa to go to Bolivia. That was in early 1939. There were a lot of Jewish people who managed to get to Bolivia, until they found out in Bolivia that there were no people who had any sort of knowledge in agriculture, and they stopped this scheme. But obviously this saved their lives, and Ferry, his son, still has a father's passport from 1939. So you see Ferry and Mr. Hübsch, and you see Ferry with his family. So you would never think that this typical South American family has roots in Senec. And obviously, as it happens, once I presented this project 6 months ago at the Jewish community, one lady told me, by the way, this is my cousin. So, of course, we don't know who's related to whom, so we didn't know there was someone who is related to Hübsch family, actually, who is a member of the Jewish community, and we have known her for many years. So I would like to share some more pictures. So for us, it was really important to collect stories. This is a picture from Mr. Weisberger's archive, or his photo albums. It shows him with young men. You see, this is time after wearing yellow stars was introduced, and you see other Jewish children there. There was another very important attempt that we found out. There were some Jewish families that communicated with the consulate of El Salvador in Switzerland. And there was an assistant to consul that convinced the El Salvadorian consul to issue special certificates of citizenship to Jews from wherever when they contacted him. And hopefully that the Germans will recognize them, that these are El Salvadorian citizens, and they will be allowed to travel to El Salvador after the war. The Germans didn't recognize it. But actually, these El Salvadorian certificates were obviously issued in more copies. One of they stayed as an archive copy of the office or office copy, and these certificates ended up in the collection of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. So through this, we were able to see there were 4 or 5 of these items that are still in the collection there. Now, I show you a very sad picture. That's a picture of deportation of the Jewish community from May 10th, 1944, when the entire Jewish community was actually assembled in front of the synagogue, and from there went to Budohaza, which was an estate, and they stayed there for roughly 1 more month, when the men or young men were taken into labor units, while the older men and women were sent through Ghetto Nové Zámky to Auschwitz, and many of them perished. The list of martyrs exists, the original copy exists from 1968, when after the last president of the Jewish community emigrated to Frankfurt, and he made a list, which is in a collection of Yad Vashem today. This is, so to say, memory of the Jewish community. Didn't think that anybody would be ever interested about this. And then from this list, with my colleague, went to all possible databases and tried to enlarge this list and to really precise it. And this list we gave 2 years ago to local activists in Senec, and also to the municipality of Senec, that they were remembered. So after the war, there were some Jews that came back to Senec, and you are able to recognize 2 families or 2 people. One is Mr. Weisberger on his way through Austria to Australia, and another one is Edita Löfberg, that managed to leave in February 1948. Just to remind you, February 25th, 1948 was the communist takeover. So she really left with her father in the very right time. And Mr. Ehrenfeld was, after the war, the chairperson of the Jewish community. There was one family that wanted to leave, but because of parents, the Linkenbergs, they stayed in the town. And that was a family of Jan Bernfeld. Jan Bernfeld decided to stay because his wife's parents were older, and they decided to stay there. And he took over the Jewish community, and he kept it going for many, many more years, with an idea that there were altogether 3 men in the family, plus I think there were 3 more Jewish men in the town. So there were always 4 more Jewish men that would stay with them at their house, and they were able to run Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur holidays there, to have a full minyan. And Mr. Bernfeld himself was a chazan for this small minyan. So they used the synagogue until 1956, when the state took over. He was also vice president of the Jewish community, and there was a very sad story that connected to him. So first of all, I want to show you, this is the house of the first Linkenberg family and later Bernfeld family, that the communists took over from them soon. And you see a very nice advertisement here in Hungarian, stating that Ignaz Linkenberg in Senec takes over a business of Joseph Csillák. Just to show you again how you can use with these kind of documents. Csillák, if you speak Hungarian, is a star. But Mr. Csillák's original name was Stern. So he became from a German star, a Hungarian star. And yeah, so you see, this is kind of example of Magyarization, how Jewish families Magyarized their names in the early 1900s. That was the case very often with many, many families. Also in my family, people changed their name. Some of them even twice, first to Hungarian, then to Slovak. Mr. Bernfeld stayed in the city, took care of the community, and over this he became a vice president of the Federation of Jewish Communities. After 1948, Czechoslovak communist regime prohibited activities of JDC, of American Joint Distribution Committee, contrary to communist countries like Poland or Hungary, that where the organization was allowed to distribute humanitarian aid to people. And this was a case in Czechoslovakia that the communists said no. But what happened actually, that the financial aid was distributed illegally through the federation. And the communists decided in the mid-1950s to run a special event, which was called Zlatá husa, Golden Goose, where they imprisoned many of them. So it was a major attack on Jewish communal structures in the country. And obviously this was after Stalin's time, after Gottwald's time, so it was not such a draconian trial as would happen a few years earlier, but still he received 2 years, and it was for 2 years in prison for helping, serving his community members. And actually we know that from research of our colleague Martin Schmock in Prague, he actually was able to research it more in detail, and he found out that actually it was Israeli consulate that was responsible for distributing this cash money, and but the communist agents managed to find out, and actually they cracked down on this entire network of people helping in Jewish communities. So after 1989, he published a book in Slovak, The Oath of Citizen Bernfeld, where he explains about his trial. And here you see him, together with his children. They managed to leave the country in 1967 for Israel. And his son, Juraj, passed away a few years ago. But we are with a contact with his daughter, Dedika, who lives in Colorado, United States. And finally, there's one more family that we were able to trace. This is family of Dr. Feldman, who was a medical doctor. He built this lovely house, which still stands in Senec in the 1930s, designed by architect Artur Salatnay-Slatinsky, that also designed the synagogue of Bratislava. Mr. Feldheim married just before World War II. Unfortunately, his wife and young daughter passed away during the war, and he married a second time, and he remained in Senec in the 50s until the early 1960s, where he was just taking care of his patients in the town, and that's how many people in Senec still remember him. He died in 1965 and is buried at the Genealogy cemetery in Bratislava. So in the picture we just got from a collection of Mr. Lampel from Israel. So you see how putting together various collections, you are learning more and more about families of Senec. Obviously, that's one of the memories, what families remember, but we wanted to also know how the community has been remembered in the past. This is an example of the leftover of Batseba at the Jewish cemetery in Senec, but you can see an example how those who died during the war and didn't have their grave were memorialized on family tombstones. So it's kind of a family memory. Senec obviously is present in a valley of communities in Yad Vashem, but obviously people always kept memory of Senec. And I have to just mention again, we have a lot of pictures from Mr. Weisberger, because we're going to interview him tomorrow, and I understand his house is a Senec museum with all the memories of this place. So he shared with us the picture of his first encounter from the early 1990s when he traveled to Senec to see what the community or what was the town like. Another very interesting picture is a big family event connected to Bat Mitzvah of one of the daughters from the Kohn family. And you can see this is kind of a strange picture because you see abandoned synagogue, family memory connected with a little bit of tourism because the entire family traveled there. You can see parking lot in front of the synagogue, plus local teenagers looking at these strange people visiting, and obviously you could buy also apples there at the grocery. So it tells you a little bit about how memory how fragmented the memory can be. And I'd like to show you with this picture. This is the picture from the last year. Mrs. Steinberg, born Irene Klein, was a daughter of Khazan. She passed away 2 years ago during summer. And when there was her first yahrzeit, her granddaughters decided to travel to Senec to see the place. So we are standing with them together with Gabor, local historian, and we were welcomed by a mayor of the town. So obviously you can see shifting also attitude towards preserving memory, and I'd like to end probably with this picture. 2 years ago, there was a major initiative in Slovakia, in many places, of reading Holocaust victims' name in many Slovak towns. It's on September 9th, which is the official Holocaust Memorial Day. And the activists in Senec involved representatives of various churches. So 2 years ago, I visited there first time with Rabbi Kapustin, and last year I just was there with Professor Lichner, was one of the leading theologians in the country. You see him standing there. And I'm there because someone had to say Kaddish. So someone has to come on behalf of the Jewish community. So we work with these people who keep the memory of the community together. There's one important person I would like to mention. There's a lady standing between me and Professor Lichner. That's Mrs. Gabriela Nemet. Gabriela Nemet is a former vice governor of the Bratislava self-governing region. And she's she's a local community politician. She's the one who has initiated actually restoration of the building of the synagogue. And I was in touch with her yesterday, so she asked me to send best regards to all people from Senec and their descendants. And we're looking forward to see you. I just want to mention, last year we launched the first time in Senec European Day of Jewish Culture. The idea was, first of all, to open a cemetery and to make a guided tour. And the second part was to present the story of the Jewish community and the local cultural center, with a lecture and speaking about our research. So there is a growing interest of schools and other people who are there. And obviously there is this big question mark: to whom belongs memory of a Jewish community? Does it belong to families that are descendants of Jewish families from Senec? Does it belong to a tiny Jewish community in the capital? Or does it belong to people who live there? Or does it belong to the current self-governing region who owns the building and restores it? This is a big question for which I don't have an answer. But I think by sharing this memory and stories and so on, we want to keep the memory of the Jewish community of Senec. So if you have time, if you want to look in the future for more details, we have a dedicated website which is simple to remember: synagogasenec.sk. And we have now a fantastic program that we begin with our team later this year. That will be further research of the Jewish community. We will make some other interesting activities, educational and cultural, in the city also in the next 2 years. So once the synagogue restoration is finished, it will be really a successful cultural and a memory project. Thank you very much.